Next topic, we're going to be looking at quantity controls. So just like price controls were a limit on the price that you could sell a good for, a quantity control is a limit on how much you can sell. So when we talk about quantity controls, the only one that we have to know about is a quota. So this is an upper limit on the quantity sold. So you're restricting the amount of something that can be sold. Normally, this is done through licenses. So things like hunting licenses, liquor licenses, taxi medallions is a big one that we're going to get into discussion on later. These are all quantity controls. It's trying to limit some sort of activity that you deem harmful if too many people do it. So in those cases, you have the obvious issue with liquor licenses having, a bar on every corner. That obviously is something that legislators wanted to control. Hunting licenses, you don't want over hunting. Same thing with fishing license, you don't want to overfish because that would decimate the populations. Taxi medallions, you don't want. For those of you who don't know what taxi medallions are, it's basically a license to operate a taxi. The idea behind those is you don't want to clog up the streets with lots and lots of cars. So that's the idea of a quantity control. Now, when you have a quota, since you're imposing an artificial upper limit on the market, you're going to have a separation between your demand price and your supply price. So if you look at the market that's presented here, you have this being your market outcome quantity. You have QC being your quota. So if that's your quota, at that price, at that quantity, your demand is CC, is your demand price. Your supply price is PC. So you now have a wedge between the demand price, the price at which consumers will demand that quantity, and the supply price, which once again is PC right here. So you have put a wedge between those two. Your supply price is now lower than your demand price. Now this space is effectively the quota rent. So if this was for a taxi medallion, here would be our market outcome. Here would be our quota. This is our demand price. This is our supply price. The difference between CC and PC is our quota rent. The QR. So that's our quota rent. So it's the price of the taxi medallion, if you will. So the way we sort of phrase this is consumers might pay a higher price as a result of a quantity control, but producers will actually receive a lower price as well, because the difference in those two is how much is going towards the license. Now, this also creates differences in consumer and producer surplus. If you notice, since consumer surplus is the price consumers pay, the demand curve and the y-axis, for consumer surplus is much smaller than it would typically be, since it would typically be this whole triangle, but it shrunk to this tiny one. Same thing happened with producers. It's the price producers receive, the y-axis, and the supply curve. The producer surplus also shrank because normally it would have been this triangle if the market was allowed to do its thing. So we have shrinking surpluses. We have the creation of deadweight loss, which is labeled here B, that's sort of the quantification of um, the lost transactions. So whenever you see deadweight loss, those are lost transactions. And this area in between all of this, that's how much is going to um, payment of the total quota. So the quota rent would be, the rent per sale. Uh, the entire area of that rectangle that I just colored in, rectangle A, would be sort of the overarching for the entire market, how much is being put towards the quota. So, like I said, it's inefficient. You have lost transactions as explicitly given to you by the existence of deadweight loss, which is this area formed by the quantity that's being sold, the demand curve, and the supply curve. So that is the deadweight loss. And this also incentivizes illegal activity. Um, One of the biggest changes to the cars for hire has been Uber and Lyft and other ride sharing applications. When they first came out, they were illegal in many cities because they didn't have taxi medallions. They were operating illegally. So when we take a look at taxis, what they did was they came in and they basically incentivized illegal activity. And really, you haven't seen Uber or Lyft or any other ride sharing applications face any consequences for that. But we will be debating on whether or not they should have and sort of the overarching effects of that later on. But that, in the end, is quantity controls.